Welcome back to the Ben Mulroney Show. And every week we like to keep a note of all the big stories that involve sort of some of the biggest brands in the world, and we keep them tucked away. I could talk about it myself, but I'd be like a child wandering into the middle of a conversation. So instead, we like to bring an expert on to break down these stories and what they might mean to you. So please welcome to the show, Tony Chapman. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Always a pleasure.
Okay, so let's start with this concept of over-tourism. There are certain places that are just brimming with so many tourists that the people who actually live in those places are getting upset. We saw it happen in Venice. Now we're seeing in places like Barcelona, where the number of tourists is not only offending the people who live there, but it's actually making life worse. And they're starting to take matters into their own hands.
You know, it's an interesting because as you listen to the leaders of these groups, and these are massive protests. We're not talking about a dozen people. They're saying it's not the tourists they're upset with. It's the fact that so much wealth has been consolidated with a handful of people. They're buying up all the apartments that people used to live in and turning them into Airbnbs. Right. And then they're only sort of paying minimum wage. So there's no sense of wealth sharing. So the people living in Barcelona, my costs are going up, my wages are going down, there's more traffic. So something's got to move and something's got to change. And they're putting a lot of pressure on the politicians. And what we're seeing is a huge backlash against the Airbnbs of the world, saying, you know what, you want to buy an apartment and live in it as opposed to rent it out. So I think that's the tension point that's got to, something's going to snap.
Well, it's interesting on a lot of fronts. One, like the fact that they're taking matters into their own hands, and they've got like squirt guns and they're just randomly squirting tourists. And the goal is just to make them a little uncomfortable. And I kind of like that. I mean, listen, in Canada, we call it assault. Assault, and I like remember that story about the guy who got arrested with a squirt gun for having a weapon. But I kind of like that. It sort of sends a point. But the second thing is, it's important to note, this isn't NIMBYism, right? This isn't like, oh, we love tourism, we just don't want to hear. They like tourism. Of course, they know it's a driver for the economy. But it's just that it's driven the culture and the reason to live there off a cliff.
Yeah, and not only that, even the little shop owners. I remember going to Venice the first time. Every shop owner, there's a little map store, there's a little crystal store, there's a bookstore, and all of a sudden it's all taken over by Burberry and Gucci and Versace, and every city has the same street. So I think that what greed overpowers what the culture of the city should be about. Local people. I want to see somebody hanging clothes in the morning. I want people that live and breathe that city. That's why I go there. I want to experience Barcelona like Barcelonians. But if it just becomes this big tourist game, shell game, everybody's pushed aside. What you get is social unrest and civil unrest. And sadly, that's what we're seeing. And I mean, Barcelona is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But if people can't afford to live there, pretty soon it's just going to be a Disneyland for tourists. It'll be a movie set,
right? Exactly. Movie set. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so it feels like almost every week we have an example of Netflix taking over the world and rewriting the rules. And last year or this summer rather, there was that big Mike Tyson boxing match, right? And a lot of viewership, got some hype. Not a great fight, but now that they've announced the Alvarez-Crawford fight on September 13th, which is a real fight, one of the biggest fights in years, I got to wonder whether this was all part of their design. Where, okay, the first fight we're going to do is going to be one where the stakes are very low, but we get to road test our idea for becoming the destination for boxing.
Yeah, well, look at what Netflix did with F1, Formula One. They put that on the map because they realized they have streaming services. Everybody says the end of pay-per-view. It's called pay-per-view. Netflix, you pay to view that thing. They've just got the subscription base and the dollars and cents. They can go after the biggest sports properties now. The domain of the CBSs and the ABCs and even the pay-per-view are all going away because Netflix says, I can write the check. So what are you going to do? You're going to say, well, maybe everybody's going to show up that night at the bar and pay the money? Or I'm going to take the guaranteed money up front. And that's what Netflix has got. Money always rules those negotiations. And listen, they got Dana White in from Ultimate Fighting. They've got a lot of big promoters. I think this is the beginning of Netflix's major move on the chessboard to dominate sports and those big live events, and to leave the main networks hanging. And without sports, I question the hanging part.
But it was that live thing that a lot of people were wondering about. And I think that's why they had to try it on something where the stakes were low, right? They had to, and because they had some failures, right? I guess the servers couldn't handle how many people were jumping onto the network.
Yeah, and it was jumpy and everything else. But again, everybody talks about change taking years. With AI nowadays, you can isolate the problems and fix it at the speed of light. And I'll tell you something. You look at Netflix. Would you not bid for the F1 now that you own the F1 audience with Drive to Survive?
Yeah.
Would you not bid for golf now that you have the Full Swing as one of your hit shows? It's just a natural extension.
Right.
The backstory and the live story, combining the two, I think Netflix is a runaway train with very little in front of it.
So I remember back in the day that if you were a sports star and you wanted to leverage your celebrity to make money in marketing and promotion, you had to play in New York, Los Angeles, maybe Boston, Miami if you had roots in the Latin community. That was it. If you worked anywhere else, you get like small local campaigns.
Pizzaville ads.
Pizza, yeah. Nothing wrong with Pizzaville. We like them very much.
I know, but I'm just saying. I mean, my thing is you get a local brand.
So you got this Canadian kid, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's the tremendous, one of the greatest players of his generation, playing in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And he's the face of Converse. He's he wants to be a guy who moves the needle on global fashion.
Well, this is a great story to unpack. But first of all, athletes used to just sing for their supper. They had a bit of celebrity, you hired them as an endorsement. Then they said, I actually want to control the creative product. Michael Jordan, I want to be part of designing the shoe. Kanye West with Wheezy's. Now you're going and saying, I don't want to just sing for the supper and be part of the creating the menu. I want to own the diner.
Yeah.
And what these guys are doing is realizing their celebrity on the court, if they can turn it into a following online, they can monetize it. They can make the $1 billion George Clooney did pass and go with his tequila. And this is what we're seeing is we're seeing these young kids coming out going, we're fashion forward. Why should we simply be, send me your clothes, I'll wear it? No, I want to own a piece of the fabric.
Yeah, Converse, in an effort to keep him as their biggest star, gave him the title of creative director of Converse.
Yeah.
And apparently his finger, that's not a vanity title. He actually works for that.
But they're so image conscious. These people have come up on TikTok and social media and digital media. They've been creating since they're age 5. Why wouldn't they want to express their creativity, the fact of the shoes I wear? And you know what? Because they're doing it, there's authenticity to it, and authenticity is what sells fashion.
So I don't know if you listen to the podcast Smart List, but it's one of the funniest.
Absolutely.
I love it so much. Insightful, very funny. 3 great friends. What are their names? Will Arnett.
Will Arnett.
You got
Jason
Bateman and Jack from Will and Grace. And it's a tremendous show. And look, these guys typically have on their store, they got a merch store. Like that's what you do. That's how you find a new income stream. How did they find their way into having their own cell phone service?
Well, it's interesting because you're now seeing these podcast stars being signed for $100 million deals and migrating to television and YouTube. But what they did differently is they said, we've got such a following and we kind of represent the people. Like we're not the elite. We're just the average guy you want to have a beer with.
Yeah.
So a cell phone service came in saying, we're launching this line extension value brand. Everybody's in the no frill space. Yeah. Why don't we do it with you? You 3 be the lead singers of it. We'll give you a cut of the action. You don't have to do anything. You're not like they're going to go hang fiber anywhere. They're just simply trading on their celebrity. It goes back to the same story we're talking about. When you build a following bigger than CBS, when you have 100 million followers, when you have every week somebody's listening to your podcast, that's the attention that every marketer lives for. Attention's the oxygen of marketing. They breathe attention, and therefore they can sign these deals. And to tell you something, they're becoming. If anybody wants to give me $100 million for Chatter That Matters, I'm all ears. But I'll tell you something, their podcast, they deserve it.
Yeah, well, and this is the new media, right? Like, I mean, the podcast space is probably the most competitive media space around it. I think a couple of years ago, I was quoting the number that there were 1 million active podcasts. Like
3.5 million now.
Now it's 3.5 million. I mean, that's a lot of noise.
Well, I got to give you a stat. I'm in the top 0.5% most popular worldwide with Chad and Magic. That's amazing. 17,000 other podcasts can claim that, including Joe Rogan, who gets more downloads as we're speaking than I've had since my inception. That's how competitive the field is.
It is. So
3 million television channels.
If you're able to cut through that noise and create something of value for your listeners, then that value should translate into money in your pocket. And if they can find ways to do it, I'm all for it. I'm all for it for them.
Absolutely.
Tony Chapman, thank you very much for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
I will.
Thanks so much for watching the show. Now, if you enjoyed what you saw, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode of The Ben Mulroney Show.